Now we've noticed earlier that graphs that are symmetrical about the x-axis are not functions. However, typically graphs that are symmetrical about the y-axis or the origin are. And in those special cases, we can also label them as either an even function or an odd function. So I want to give you a definition of an even function. That's where we'll take some function, evaluate it at negative x, and if it produces that function with a positive value of x, we have an even function. An odd function is if we evaluate it again with a negative x and it produces the entire function being negative. That's odd. And then if neither of those cases happen, then it's neither even nor odd. So for an example of an even function, let's make a function. We have f of x equals x squared. And that graph, here, let's try to get some colors on it so we can kind of see where everything's happening at. Follows that route. And you can see the symmetry about the y-axis. And it also means that every corresponding side or point on the left side corresponds to the point on the right. So this point, whatever it might be, let's imagine it's -1 and 1, corresponds with a point over here at 1 and 1. So there we have a function that is even. Now let's look at a function that would be odd. And we're going to look at f of x equals x cubed. We saw this one earlier. And you can see the reflection about the origin. This case, that is an odd function. Again, with corresponding points. For example, the point 2 and 4 corresponds with the point -2 and -4. All right, so that's a graphical representation of what those graphs look like. Well, how can I use this definition you gave me earlier, Willie, to determine that? Well, let's look at this first function, x squared. So I'm going to evaluate that function with a negative x. Work that down, and I get negative x squared is x squared. And I started with, that was my original function. Now if the right side remains, and I get the same thing as the right side, I started with an x squared, and I looked at the right side solution. It also maintains or becomes the same thing. That is a definition of where we can find an even function. Now let's contrast that with an odd function. We start with a function. Now to test if it's an odd function or not, we're going to go ahead and substitute in a negative x, work that through, and that becomes negative x cubed. I'll compare the original with a new one, and if the new one is the same thing but it's just negative of that function, then that is a test to show that it is an odd function. So we'll do a couple more examples to help you kind of unpack that a little bit, but I just want to get you the idea that symmetry about the y-axis will typically produce an even function, and symmetry about the origin will produce an odd function, and both of those are also functions.